The 1918 flu pandemic, while commonly known as the Spanish flu, devastated the world of the early 20th century. The disease, appearing under time of one of the most destructive wars in all of history, swept across the continent. Sound familiar? We've just experienced a similarly influential pandemic in the past few years. Over 100 years later, we're still dealing with worldwide pandemics, propaganda, and misinformation. But like all other things, in order to understand how this happened, we need to understand how we got here. So imagine for a second you're the leader of a country in 1918. Chances are things are going pretty badly. Your economy is failing, your morale is low, and you're stuck in a war of attrition. What does this mean? A war of attrition is aimed to weaken the other side to a point that they can no longer fight. This obviously drains a country's resources immensely. And right now, that war, World War I, is kind of a big deal. So all your country's resources are going to fight the enemy. To make things worse, there is another threat on the horizon. In early 1918, a strain of the flu virus began to spread. There is no clear consensus on where the virus came from, but many epidemiologists agree that it came from somewhere in the United States. Since the war was still ongoing, it exacerbated the spread of the virus. This is because sick soldiers could not fight and were sent to crowded military hospitals. There, they would spread the disease to other people, causing an epidemic. Why is this virus known as the Spanish flu? Well, in many countries, reporting on it simply wasn't allowed due to the risk of damaging morale. The exception was Spain, which was neutral at the time. Now, this virus is no joke. But how did we deal with it, and did we do it better the second time? The second wave of the Spanish flu in 1918 was particularly deadly. It had a fatality rate of 10% and would kill victims by drowning them in their own lung fluid. Many places tried quarantine to no avail. In Canada, minorities like French Canadians and First Nations were especially hard hit. In total, 50,000 people died in Canada, the majority of which were between ages 20 and 40. Now let's look back at our current pandemic. COVID, on the other hand, has a death rate of around 1% and heavily affects the elderly. However, it spreads much more easily. The death count, however, is similar to the Spanish flu at around 46,000 deaths currently. So what happened in the 100 years between the pandemics? After the pandemic, people were eager not to have it happen again. In 1919, Canada created the Federal Department of Health. This eventually evolved into Health Canada and the Public Health Agency. At the time of the Spanish flu, people believed that it was caused by a bacterium. The actual virus was not isolated until the 1930s. At the time, there was also no effective vaccine. The combination of these factors meant that we were much more prepared to deal with this pandemic. Right? Well, it's a lot more complicated. As with the 1918 pandemic, there were people who blatantly refused to wear a mask. And the internet, while good at providing information, is also good at providing misinformation. Also, the lower mortality rate can be a double-edged sword. While it had a lower death rate, it also spread more quickly and silently. This also meant that people were generally less concerned about it. So this brings us back to our main question. Did we learn from the Spanish flu? So here we are. We're past the point of a pandemic, or at least past the point that we care, and now we can look back at the mess that just happened. I believe we have utilized our time since the Spanish flu to some extent. Obviously, there were glaring issues in our pandemic response, but our better technology proved useful. For every mass protester that halted our progress, we had many law-abiding citizens that helped us stop the spread. Although we don't think of the Spanish flu in our day-to-day lives, the institutions and technology it created truly helped us stop the spread of this pandemic. May we sit back and hope that when the pendulum swings again, future generations will learn from our lessons.